Okay. Hi, Mark Pecaro.
Hey Roy.
Glad to have you with us here on another episode of In the Spotlight. We're going to have a really interesting conversation today, I think, from multiple angles, both RevOps as well as sales leadership. But maybe before we jump in, I'll just give a short introduction. So, Mark is the founder and CEO of Scale AI Go to Market, where he's working with startups scaling from zero to about B rounds, C rounds, around 25, 30 million. He's done that multiple times. He's an advisor both to CROs and RevOps teams, so that conversation is going to be interesting from both angles. You've been the global VP sales at Firefly, spent time in a great company called Sumo Logic that I know well, many people from there, and then a lot of experience from Cisco days early on. So thanks for being with us, Mark.
Thank you, Roy. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the very complimentary introduction.
Yeah, and we just started, I think, having some offline conversations the last few weeks, and I thought your views are spot on some of the stuff that we're deep into, and so I'm really looking forward for this conversation. And thank you for the advisory and time that you spent helping us think through what's happening in this market. So maybe we start by just having you sort of define what value sales is to you through when you see a sales team for the first time and you try to evaluate their maturity level. What's your criteria? How do you evaluate where they are on the journey of value selling?
Yeah, that's a good question, Roy. And a lot of first line leaders struggle with that as well as individual contributors, account managers, and executives. I think there's a academic angle to this, and then there's a practical execution angle to that. Value selling in and of itself is one of the methodologies out there. And academically, you've got business issues that need to be uncovered, that need to have time-bound and measurable metrics. And this is taught to many mid-enterprises and enterprises, and certainly it was one of the sales methodologies that I learned when I was at Cisco. But it really connects to the value of the buyer, finding the pain and sort of quantifying that in a way. And that's what's taught, across value selling. In practice, the way you execute it, that's a little less data and a little more, art in a way. But it's truly connecting with your champion, the economic buyer, and trying to fully uncover, fully vet, fully understand the impact horizontally on what the issue is. And it's important to quantify that, to put some operational metrics, some operational quantitative impact data to that on the pre-sale side. The idea of value selling is pre-sales, but it should not be lost on the first line leaders that it's also a post-sales motion as well. Realization of that value. And that's, the panacea of land and expand for SaaS companies or PLG companies. That's really when you get the expand or cross-organizational expansions as well, is when that value realization comes to life, is documented, and shared across, the department of the coaches and the champions, and really the economic buyer hopefully has grasped that and emanated that across the organization in terms of value realized. Value is, RCR, revenue, cost, and risk. It's an easy acronym to remember. I used it as a salesperson and a sales leader, but if you're hitting one of those buckets of revenue, cost, and risk, and proposing value and then delivering value, you're in a very good spot of executing and solving some of the business issues or pains of the CIO or of the CTO, of the VP of infrastructure, or the VP of software development.
Yeah. So I think what I like about this view is, you touched on the theory and the value drivers and the quantification, and we all know, getting the metrics to create business cases, which is sort of the mechanics of value sales. But you actually started from understanding and collaborating with your champion and your team. And what I like about that is that people who know the theory don't always know how to implement that theory, how to go through the discovery, create the partnership, have the customer open the kimono and share. Sometimes the customers themselves don't know exactly what their gap is and how big their gap is. And so creating that trust and going through that journey and creating that partnership is key to understanding those later parts that you talked about, right? What is the gap? What is the value, the risk, the cost? And so, and the flip side of that is even after you get them to share and get them to give you the data, you need to then formalize it and have it delivered to people who are not in this conversation, the CFO, the economic buyer, which you haven't met maybe, and a few others. So there's a delivery part, right? And there is the theory of the mechanics, and we need to remember both of them. And sometimes the delivery part is a little bit even harder to pick up on. So I 100% subscribe to that. And then the second piece is value selling doesn't stop with the first sale, right? It's definitely something that we see more and more, and even that piece could be broken down, right? To the handoff, and then to the journey, and then to the upsell. So that could be broken out as well.
100% agree. It doesn't stop with the signature of the agreement. The post-sale realization piece is 100% massive.
So when you look at your key persona for this, sort of the champion, the champion is probably the one of the pivot areas of MEDDIC or MEDDPICC as a qualification framework. And through the champion, you're able to discover so much more also related to MEDDIC and MEDDPICC. And while MEDDIC is sort of separate from the core value discussion, they many times go hand in hand, and we see that in teams. And so when you look at your historic teams that you worked with, how did MEDDIC or any other framework that you used actually transformed your team?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, MEDDIC or MEDDPICC is out there. We did subscribe to Value Selling by Value Selling Associates. They're great, as well as Command of the Message in the force management outfit, just stellar and quality in what they produce. The MEDDPICC, and I like that they added the P, right? And it's not just MEDDIC because that really gets into the paper process of, getting the deal completely done. But, one of the things about MEDDPICC that, is sometimes confused is it's a great qualification tool of your deal. It's a great asset to have a party, as I would say, with your account team, with your cross-functional folks to MEDDPICC a deal. And those can be, 60-minute, 90-minute sessions to really identify, where you're at in your deal. What pieces are missing given the stage, right? If you've got your sales motion in stages in your forecast, I've seen people and RevOps teams do it very differently. But, one of the best that I've seen is that research phase within your sales stages. Then you've got your discovery phase. Then you've got your scoping phase. Then you've got your validate phase. Then you've got your go or no-go phase of your motion in your CRM. And then you've got that negotiate and close phase. And that's one of the best or best in class phases and stages. And as you go through those stages, each one has its own distinct and should, like a good RevOps team, for each stage will have a set of activities, objectives, and exit criteria for each stage. And as you go through your deal, within that, you're going to have MEDDPICC sprinkled and salted throughout your stages, and that is a part of your exit criteria. But when you're when you're actioning, MEDDPICC, it's a deal qualification exercise, and you bring in that account team to really suss out and tease out, what you have, what you don't have, what you're missing, and then it turns into an action plan, and you assign actions with dates and if there's constraints. But, enterprise selling and enterprise sales and what good looks like, an account team will have everybody in that MEDDPICC session, identifying gaps, assigning roles and actions, creating an action plan. And if you're a client director that's global, these are great 90-minute sessions to have. One of the big things that comes out of MEDDPICC that is often not taught is champion building and really knowing who's who, where there's the power lies, what is their interest from a business perspective on your initiative, on your technology, or the level of interest in the problem that they have. Champion building is so critical because in enterprise sales, you can easily get lost and bet on the wrong person. Really, everybody should be advocates and you should be winning the vote of everybody, but you do have coaches, you have champions or usually multiple champions, and then you have that economic buyer. And even if we go a level deeper, some of them have authority or don't, and some of them have influence or don't. And that is an interesting 2x2 kind of rubric when you look at coaches and champions, is where are they in that influence and ownership or that influence sort of rubric there. And, there's a lot you can do around building champions, testing champions, but MEDDPICC in itself, from my view, falls into each of those sales stages that I talked about: research, discovery, scope, validate, go, no go, and negotiate and close. They should be exit criteria to go to the next stage within the CRM. And it's a great framework and session for 90 minutes. Like every account team, every RevOps team should be a part of that, especially in enterprise selling and certainly the first line leaders.
I can subscribe to a lot of what you said about coaches and champions. I had a deal about a year and a bit ago, just a quick war story here. And it was a big organization, and we had a clear champion. He was the head of the department that's responsible for getting us. He's the person who who had the personal pain. He had access to budget, to the economic buyer. He was running the show. He was doing the evaluation. And like he was the most engaged person with us by far, like by 100x. And he actually carried us through the deal pretty nicely. And then at some point, it's a large organization. And then at some point, like two-thirds of the way, the deal started stalling. And we didn't understand why. We literally couldn't understand why, because there wasn't a no. It was just like, meetings getting canceled and this person is shifting times, and it started going in circles. And now we need to talk to this other person who speaks to us for the first time, which is weird because if it's relevant, they should have spoken to us before. And it's like everything that was progressing linearly nicely started sort of getting out of focus. And we regrouped internally and we tried to analyze like what's happening. Why is this happening? And what's the root cause? And where can we make a change? And we thought maybe there's a competitor that's doing this to us. Maybe they're going through a reorg or budget discussions. Maybe whatever is happening, and we thought only about things that are not in our control. But then we brought it back, and we said, hey, why don't we try and talk to the manager of that champion? And he wasn't considered a champion for us because he completely was disengaged from the engagement, completely delegated this to the guy that we were speaking to, and he wasn't the economic buyer. Economic buyer was above him. Okay. And so I made the effort, got the meeting with the manager, and said, "Look, like I don't understand why we're not moving forward. Where is it going?" And then he said, "Yeah, everything is in order. I just think the team doesn't know how to push this through the organization. It's a complex organization." And so within 2 weeks, he just cleared the way, and we went to the economic buyer. We got the approval. The deal immediately got unlocked. And the lesson learned was even though the previous the person we called our champion had all three boxes checked, he had a personal win, he had access to economic buyer, he was responsible for the decision and the solution technically, and he had influence. He did have influence, but apparently not enough. Right? And so when the rubber hit the road, at that point where there was confusion in the organization of where they should be going, his influence was not sufficient to overcome this confusion in the organization. But his manager had more influence on this decision, and he just sort of put his foot down and said, "This is what we're doing," and people aligned. And his manager had also the other pieces, personal win, because it's his team that's supposed to be more effective. He definitely had access to economic. So they both checked all boxes, but the level of influence was different. But because his manager was quote unquote shy and was in the background, we never got to develop him as a champion. And so, you said sometimes you have more than one champion. I don't know if that was more than one champion. I think it seemed like we have more than one champion, but when the rubber hit the road, we had one champion, and that was the manager. And the lesson learned is not always the champion that you think is carrying you through is not necessarily the champion that's going to help you close the deal. And which means he's not a champion, right? He's a coach, a very good one, probably a very strong one, but can't carry it through. So anyway, I think it's exactly what you're talking about, and it's not a unique story, right?
Yeah, and especially in the enterprise, you've got a lot of folks that get involved with evaluating on the technical side, helping push on the business side, trying to help you get a meeting with the economic buyer. But in the enterprise, yeah, 100%, you've got a lot of folks that are in there to help and to help organize and prove it out and validate. And, deciphering through coaches and champions and the economic buyer can be complex, especially if you're doing it remote and you're not on site. Makes
Right.
it a lot easier over time if you're, regional and you're able to build a connection and get on site and build trust versus doing it all remote, which, there's got to be a balance there. But yeah, the authority and the influence is key when it comes to identifying the champions.
Right, right. That's a good point. So let's shift gears for a second and go from people to tech. And you're working with a lot of RevOps teams, which are pushing a huge amount of tech into sales teams in the last decade or so. The amount of the size of the tech stack, the amount of tools that have been pushed in the last decade is so big. The amount of AI that is now getting pushed into go-to-market teams is huge. But when you look at data from the last 10 years, quota attainment is not growing, it's actually going down. The cost of acquisition didn't really improve. And so when you look at all of these efficiency tools, productivity tools, planning tools that are pushed into the go-to-market organization, why aren't we seeing a transformational change in the results of enterprise sales?
Yeah, I think that's not only your question, but I think the question of many CEOs and CROs that are out there. We've hit a nice era over the last 7 years or so where they've really where technology companies, SaaS companies have really focused on go-to-market platforms and tools. From call recording to deal inspection to even outbound, top of funnel, mid funnel, and kind of end of funnel. We can kind of call that. Look, it's a challenge for SaaS companies out there today. I think the tools that are really focused on go-to-market, that are really improving conversions, and that in this economy, there's a lot of like underswells in all directions that are pulling right now, political, economic, geopolitical. Um, it's a, wherever your currency is, the mighty dollar wins. And the ability to discover and express the value and the impact, those are the companies that are going to win. And if they're investing in tools, if RevOps teams are investing in platforms that improve those conversion rates mid-funnel, not about putting more stuff in top of funnel, but mid-funnel to late funnel, and that it's improving the effectiveness of their individual teams, the account teams, and the leadership. Of course, you got to hire great talent, but it's those conversion rates and the value that's being proposed and executed that matters to the CFO. Now, you could be modernizing whatever tech you're selling, you could be modernizing and ripping out 20, 30-year-old stuff for your stuff. You could be, you know, adding on to observability. You can be enhancing security. Whatever it is, and again, it's tough, but you look at the go-to-market motion, and if you're improving conversion rates that are translating into bookings, cash collected in the bank, and you're realizing that value, and you're showing the CFO that everything we proposed in pre-sales is real and maybe then some, you've bought credibility, you have equity to go into other departments, other towers, and sell up or sell horizontally. And I think the sales tech that figures that out, right, becomes essential and not a nice to have. There's a lot of sales tech that's nice to have, that enhances the motion, makes reps and first line leaders more productive, gives RevOps better visibility, top of funnel, mid funnel, late funnel, gives growth marketing or the outbound marketing team or the outbound SDR team, more top of funnel. Those are nice to haves. But when you're executing on what's in your funnel and improving those conversion rates and the book rate and delivering the value, product has to be, aligned, obviously, as well. So you can hit value moments in the product and onboarding that ideally feed into that North Star metric of your economic buyer and your champion. Those sales tech companies that are enhancing that mid to late funnel, I think they're going to win.
Okay, interesting. So, you're saying that we've been sprayed with tech. Some of the tech is it has benefits, but it's in the margins of the critical problems we're trying to solve. But the tech that's actually focused on how to get execution in mid and late funnel into results, that's what's gonna move the needle. And I want to add to that another angle maybe, which is I think the go-to-market of the revenue tools vendors has been so strong because of many reasons. We're not going to get into that, but it has to do with, VCs and others. And so the marketing and the messaging, the go-to-market has been so strong and the market became so noisy that people had a hard time, still have a hard time, first identifying their root cause of the number one bottleneck or the number one area that they need to solve or improve, and then find out how a technology can fit into their processes, their tech stack, the actual problem they're trying to solve, the flow of their everyday users, and not actually become a value add that's now yet another tool to learn, yet another workflow to develop in the organization, yet another tool to administer. And so it's keeping the go-to-market team focused on what they do, not defocusing so they can go and get value from other things, but keeping them focused and then also prioritizing the technology that's actually going to make the change based on where their bottleneck is, right? And so I see that when we're having this kind of a conversation with prospects at Spotlight, the lack of understanding of what it means to their own users to go out and do stuff in other platforms. I mean, they now know it's not a good thing, but there's a lack of understanding of how much it actually blocks them from getting value. And so being able to fit the technology into the DNA of that company and then also prioritize technology based on the number one pain that they have in the go-to-market. First of all, understanding where your bottleneck is hard. That's an analysis that not everybody is able to do. So I think it's very interesting that you're focusing on it on mid and late funnel, which sometimes is the hard part to fix. It's easier to say, just give me more pipeline and everything will get fixed. But I 100% agree. And I think more pipeline with mediocre execution doesn't get results. So 100%. So when let's get very tactical. If you work with a RevOps team today and they're planning their 2026 technology, tech stack purchasing or tech stack plan, what do they need to look for in 2026?
Well, that's the time of the year right now, right? They're closing out Q4, planning for Q4, planning for sales kickoff. I think it's a fun time when you're in sales right now, go to market and RevOps. And I think we're in an era, and it's the rise of operations, in my perspective. Account operations, not account executives, not account management, they're important. And we need to optimize and hire great ones and enable them as best as possible. But the operations around account management, account executive, I call account operations. Same things with sales development. It's not the SDR, but sales development operations. The RevOps team, it is the rise of operations in my point of view. And the RevOps team is really at the epicenter of putting in the right operational system and platforms. And if we go further down, kind of the tooling and the processes that have guardrails. And AI native, AI enabled or embedded has to be something that the RevOps teams look at first. I do go back to the execution of deals. As you build a system, a RevOps team, as you integrate platforms and tools into your systems as a RevOps leader, certainly there's going to be now AI components of that to automate and to make it easier. But what you were keying on earlier was that adoption piece, making it easier for those account operations teams or sales development operations teams or customer success operations teams. And RevOps has a huge say in the technology choice and the practices and the metrics and the data. So, this is a fun time of the year if you're in RevOps. It's not lost on me that those folks are not sleeping. They've got deadlines right now. They're highly stressed out. They're building SCO. They're pulling in people from EMEA to be a part of SCO and plan and prep, and they're closing out Q4 and the end of the fiscal. If you're in RevOps right now, it's game on, right? It's you're going 200 miles an hour, having fun, learning a lot, chipping your teeth and learning, but it's a crazy time. But re-looking at that stack, right? Re-looking at, are we going back to important basics of our sales methodology, of deal execution? Do we have the right tools in place to get that done? Are we leveraging AI in the right areas? We created a culture internally of keeping people open-minded in the go-to-market sales organization around adopting AI because it's a huge efficiency boost. RevOps teams play just a massive role right now in educating around systems and tools and being leaders in experimenting and trying with AI native or AI enabled and embedded platforms that impact that go-to-market motion. And anywhere you can tap in to get more visibility in a deal, ideally full traceability of that deal and removing some of the, let's just say human bias, right? We're humans. We're real. There's great things about humans and not so great things about human in the context of sales and forecasting and having a predictable, repeatable sales motion. Maybe AI is good at scraping some of those trends, right? And data and putting it in there and, let the human do other things because we're all biased, unfortunately. So tools that give you that just complete traceability. And I go back to like my Cisco days. A network engineer wants a full topology of their entire network and all the devices, including the flow of traffic and best paths to route. A RevOps person should have a very similar mindset, as does the CRO or a VP of sales, and that usually has operational or RevOps experience. I want that full traceability in every touch point across my sales methodology and my sales stages, backed by data that is non-biased and factual. So I've got a full picture of my topology. I like using that word traceability. I've got kind of the biases removed, and I've got pure fact if I'm a legal kind of lawyer looking at a deal. And now I want value because the CFO, it's a mandate. A tool and a system with guardrails that improves conversion rates, book deals, value delivered, and value realized. I think RevOps teams play a huge role right now. And they are at that epicenter, and things are shifting, right? Things are becoming more operationally contextual. And RevOps teams it's a fun time to be in RevOps. It's a fun time to be in operations and sort of, adopt and implement and enable and take your organization to 10 million and 25 million and 100 million.
I love that. When we were talking to RevOps about 4 years ago or so, we started doing some research towards the formation of Spotlight, and I think 1 out of 20 was a strategic RevOps. 19 were really in the weeds, doing the work, you know, busy in operations, but 1 out of 20 could step back and look at the view that you're describing here, which is how do I get that all traceability? How do I get the right data to support everything I do? How do I drive the adoption of what I bring in? And today, I think the numbers are very different. So I think there's been an elevation in strategy or strategic thinking in RevOps. We see this within our customer base. The successful teams, more and more successful teams, are driven by strategic RevOps, not just operational RevOps. Obviously, they have to be operational. Without it, the organization falls apart. But they also are able to step back and have a strategic conversation. And when that happens, the CO becomes like a 3x impact CRO, sorry, it becomes like a 3x impact CRO because they have somebody that can talk at the strategic level that they might be thinking, but also has the ability to understand the how and what's going to drive it and not just sort of put a goal without the ability to understand how to get there. So 100% agree. We had Carrie from SysDig a while ago here on the podcast, and she said very similar things, which is you could see how she's thinking strategically at scaling an organization, not just running the operations every day. So love it. I think there's going to be more discussions on RevOps that we're going to do, and the rise of RevOps. Let's go.
I love it. Yeah, it's a fun time.
Mark, thank you so much. This has been fun. Great conversation. We have a lot to do.
Thank you for having me on, Roy. Appreciate what you do and what Spotlight does, and happy to be on anytime.
Thanks.